All right, guys, here we go. Another rundown on what's been happening out on Kentucky Lake. We're going into the last week of April here, and I've got a lot to cover. The Toyota Series wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. Congratulations to Mateo on that win. And it's the last week of April. You know what that means here on Kentucky Lake. The north end of the lake, south end of the lake, and Lake Barkley is going to be wrapped up with the USA Bass guys. They're here for about a week, and I wanted to hop on here and kind of give everybody a rundown on what's been happening out here. I got a lot to cover. It's been a little bit since I did my last report. So the biggest thing right now is the water level. You know, everything seems to be ahead this year here on Kentucky Lake. And what I mean by that is everything kind of greened up, water temperatures warmed up quick, and the water level, they actually started pulling it up a little bit earlier this year, it seemed like, but it's taken it a while to get to that full pool level. And here on Kentucky Lake in the spring of the year, you've got to have, especially on this north end of the lake, where a lot of the shallow bushes and stuff, they've just about all gone. And there's still some that's farther back in the creeks. But what happens is if that water's not up to at least that 359.5 mark, usually you're not going to have much of a flipping bite, so to speak. So we haven't had any rains. Everything's super dry. We got a little bit of rain here. I thought the water levels would come up. We're still holding right there around that high 357. It's right at 358. So we like another foot or so getting to that summer pool level. That all being said, everything seems to be ahead, but the water levels are still, you know, they like getting up there. So it's made things a little bit interesting, a little bit trickier. The smallmouth spawn is in full swing. As you know, if you've paid any attention to any of the recent tournaments, smallmouth are dominating out here right now. You know, overall, I feel like the weights are better fishing for the smallmouth. I love to chase them when it comes to live scoping them and things like that out in the middle, on the flats, shallow stumps, things like that. That's what the guys are really that are really good with that technique. They're dominating everything out here right now. I still like to fish around. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not as good with the live scope as some of these younger guys. I'm learning it just like all of us are. But when it comes to just going out and just scoping, that's not me. That's not my style of fishing. I'll go out and do it whenever during the spawn. But I also like to just fish around, and you can catch a lot of largemouth up shallow now as well. So you've got a lot of things happening right now. The smallmouth spawn, largemouth are up spawning. You know, everybody thinks largemouth spawn on Kentucky Lake, and they start looking up shallow for shallow beds. Well, the problem with Kentucky Lake and Tennessee River in general, fish spawn a little bit deeper here than what they typically do anywhere else in the country. You've seen the guys over at Red Crest this past week. You know, some of those guys were sight fishing up a little bit shallower. You could actually see the beds, but for the most part, those fish were out off the bank a little bit spawning. And it's no different here on Kentucky Lake. They tend to spawn a little bit deeper. Those largemouth will get out there in that 3 to 4, 5 foot range, even just off the bank. About the time your boat will be going into a little pocket and you'll be pitching the bank and your boat is sitting on top of the beds. So keep that in mind when you're here in the spring of the year. Back out just a little bit and fish for those largemouth. Now the smallmouth, there's enough of them that have spawned that there should be a post-spawn bite going right now. I personally haven't found it. One of my favorite ways to catch them is just a 6 cents Divine jig head with a minnow or with a Divine swim bait on it, like that one right there, that Pro Shad. It's something with a chartreuse on it, you know, on the cloudy days. But I've not been able to find it. It just seems like that. I mean, it's out there. There's certain areas that you can get in, especially for the smallmouth. When they spawn up on those shallow bars out in the middle, you know, you're targeting that 8 to 12 foot range. And a lot of those places you can get in and just go wind that little swim bait around. A lot of times you'll catch spawners, but you'll catch some fry garters, you know, and typically that happens about right now. So I'm kind of looking for that to happen here probably in the next couple of weeks. Those fish start, you know, roaming around a little bit more. You get those cloudy, windy days, they'll start roaming around a little bit more. But for the most part, you know, the spawn is a tricky time of year, and it doesn't matter where you go in the country. I personally don't like it whenever they're spawning. It just makes, you know, unless you're, like I said, I touched on it already. If you're really good with a live scope, it's one thing. You can go out there and catch some good bags of smallmouth. But if you struggle with that technology and you're not as good with that technology, there's still ways to catch fish here. And the problem with the spawn is those fish are locked on the beds, and you've almost got to hit them right in the head, whether it's largemouth or smallmouth, either one. And you can fish around up in those pockets. And the best bait that I have found for doing that is 6 Cents actually came out with a brand new worm. I shot a video here recently of it. This is the bounce worm. This is a 3.8. I'll show you this thing here real quick. And I put that just on a shaky head. Now that's a 3.8 inch green pumpkin. That one right there, that is the perfect size for those spawning smallmouth and largemouth too. I've caught a good many largemouth on it. But if you're looking something, you know, for bed fishing, you want something a little bit smaller, something that you can get into that bed, drag it around there, and entice them to biting. But the cool thing about this worm, you could fish it on a shaky head, but it has a lot of flex in the middle. You can actually, if you wanted to even fish it wacky style, you can see it'll be a lot smaller profile. It'll be a great little bait for smallmouth on those beds. But I typically just throw just a regular shaky head around, you know, on a 1/8 or a 3/16, depending on the depth. And you can target. Water temperatures are right now, they're somewhere around that 70 to 72 degree mark, depending on where you're at in the lake. But you can run down the lake, east side or west side, and if you find those pockets, it's got any kind of shallow cover in it. There's some fish that are hanging around the ends of those trees. But I'll go in and I'll put the boat out in 12 to 14 foot of water and just fan cast, just kind of cast around. It takes some time, especially, you know, it's not a technique that you're going to cover a lot of water with. And that's why I say that it's such a tricky time of year to fish when it comes to fishing around the spawn, because they're not chasing. You know, you've got to put it right on their head. Now, I'm not saying you can't wind something around and catch a few fish, but typically the post or the pre-spawn deal of winding the crankbait, things like that, that's pretty well behind us. But now when they start running again, you know, whenever they get done spawning and they start guarding fry and they start moving back out of the creeks, there will be a time where you can still catch them on a jerkbait or a chatterbait, things like that, you know, moving it, going quick down the bank. But pull into these pockets, these shallow pockets, put the boat in about 12 foot of water, 14 foot of water, and cast up to the bank, because those fish could be up close to the bank, but 90% of your bites are going to come out off of that bank. And like I say, it's a little time consuming because you've got a lot of water here on Kentucky and Barkley Lakes, and you've got to hit them right on the head. But if you find those general populations of fish in those creeks, typically you can go back if you're fishing a tournament or if you're just fun fishing and just kind of take your time, dab through there with a shaky head. A Nico rig is another bait, a weightless, like a weightless trick worm style bait, or like a Cinco on a wacky rig. This is the new bounce worm from 6 that I was talking about. This is the 6.7 inch. Now, I'm ready to toss that thing up around some fry garters up shallow. The pink worm is kind of a staple here all over the country, actually. You know, we catch a lot of fry garters up. You wacky rig that thing, you could rig it like a Texas rig style and twitch it around up there. But anytime those fish get up shallow, and I know for a fact last week, towards the end of the week, we got up shallow, started tossing a little wacky rig around and catching a few fish. I haven't looked for it a whole lot, but I got to believe that those fry garters are going to be up there biting stuff like that right there. Now, another technique, obviously, is the Ned rig. I talk about this a lot. This is a great bait to fish around gravel, to fish around bed and smallmouth. If they're spawning on stumps, you can toss that around. This one right here, this is the dome head from 6 with the Boosa Ned on the back. You guys have heard me talk about that bait. It flat catches fish this time of year. Now, what's going to happen here in the next week or so, if the TVA starts pulling a little bit of water, and that's been another thing too, that we haven't had a whole lot of current this year. So I think that's one reason that swim bait bite is not really there like it should be. You know, the post spawn smallmouth up eating. And don't get me wrong, you can catch a few of them out there on those shallow bars and things, but for the most part, you're not catching the numbers like what I think you should catch. And part of that is being that TVA's not been pulling any water. You know, they're bringing the water up. They're not pulling a lot of water through the system. So when that happens, one thing to look for in the spring of the year is when they get on those gravel washes and gravel turns, when they start pulling that water, what it does is it sucks those fish down to the bottom. And that's when you can really catch them on a Carolina rig and catch them on a Ned rig. even around some of those places like that, you can catch them on a jerkbait still. You know, the jerkbait is something that's overlooked a lot of times. We think cold water jerkbaits. What happens here on Kentucky Lake is those fish start pulling back out. They get up, suspended up around that stuff, especially when they're not pulling any water. They're not tucked down to the bottom, especially if you get the right conditions, cloudy, overcast, and you can still catch them on that jerkbait. I've got one laying right here. This is the Provoke 106 Jank Juice. I like that one on those cloudy, overcast days. Kind of hopping around a lot here, but there's been a lot going on. There's a lot of ways to catch them right now, but for the most part, I got a feeling that the smallmouth spawn will be wrapping up here soon. They'll be, I mean, the majority of the fish I think have already spawned. There's some largemouth up spawning. Next full moon, I'm not sure when that is, but you know, there'll be a good many fish that'll flood up to the bank. And I just feel like for the most part, the most consistent bite right now is going to be taking your time, fishing slow, methodical, getting those little areas where little side pockets off the main lake, side pockets off the main fingers. You get back into like a Big Bear Creek or a Little Bear, or even on farther down south like Ledbetter, Anderson, some of those, you can pull in those small side pockets and just fish around with that shakehead. You're going to have to cover a lot of water. It's going to take a lot of time, but you can get some bites doing that. That's the most consistent thing. Now, the minnow guys, you know, the Shindo, the 5-inch Shindo, there's a 6, 5, 6, and a 7. That's no secret. I'm not going to dive off into that and the details on that. Everybody knows about a minnow on Kentucky Lake. One thing I'm excited about here soon is going to be a frog bite, and there's probably, I haven't thrown it. I've not even picked it up. It's tied on the boat in the box, but the hush frog from 6, you can skip it. It spits, it walks. You can do a lot of different things with it. And then the Vega frog, you know, it's got a little more of a popping, cupping nose. Those fish get around those yellow flowers. Everybody knows here on Kentucky Lake, the yellow flowers are a big deal. The problem is running around and finding enough water around them, but that water is slowly coming up, and I promise you there's going to be yellow flower bite. Usually what happens here on Kentucky Lake, it rains, water comes up, it floods, and there's no yellow flower bite because everything's dead. We've not had that. Yellow flowers are booming. They're everywhere out there right now, so as soon as that water creeps up, you know, and gets up around them, take that wacky rig, like I say, take that, the bounce worm, like a green pumpkin, something a little more natural, or even like the pink stuff like this Morning Dawn here. Get up around those yellow flowers, toss that frog around, you're going to catch some fish. But that's kind of it. You know, as far as the baits, I talked about water temperatures, talked about lake levels. Not really much of a flipping bite. Now, farther south you go, you have to get down farther south, but you can find more stuff in the water down there. You know, when that water level does at least reach summer pool, you can find some stuff in the water to go down there and flip around. But I've got my flipping sticks ready for it. As soon as that water creeps up, hopefully it happens here in the next little bit. We can get a couple weeks of it in anyway. But I keep telling myself, we're still in the month of April. You know, May's not even here yet. Everything's greened up. But the water level, we're just kind of waiting on that water level. But that's kind of it in a nutshell on what's been going on. If you're in the area, come by and see us at our electronic shop, Sonar Solutions there. We're in Bryansburg, right there off of Highway 68, kind of close to Precision Sonar. We do all the main major brands install shop. We do on-water training, all that right there at that shop. Everything that I've talked about today, including a whole lot more, Kentucky Lake Outdoors. Their new store is right down the road off of 68, right before you get to Moore's right there. Be sure and go and see those guys. See Ethan, Ron, all those guys. Tell them I sent you in there. Grab any of this 6 cent stuff. They've got a great selection of anything hunting, anything fishing. One of the best selections here on Kentucky Lake in this area. But you guys want a trip sometime this year? I'm booked up pretty well through May right now. I've got a few days opening for on-water training or fishing trips, bass fishing trips, tournament prep, whatever you're looking for. Shoot me an email at info@brandonhunterfishing.com, and I will see you guys on the water.